This hearing will come to order at this time. I'm going to ask everyone if you could find a seat, and we will begin on our human trafficking field hearing. Let me also say that we're pleased to be joined today by a number of organizations here in Orange County that have been very involved with a task force that I put together some time ago in order to try to bring organizations in the community together with law enforcement and some representation from the bench to try to come up with some solutions to the trafficking problems. But at this time, we'll just mention that we have some people in the audience who will go nameless with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but we appreciate their good service. But some of the others I'm going to ask to stand for a minute and be recognized. Bob Smith with FACES, Cheryl Petluck from Vineyard, Anaheim, Human Trafficking Ministry, Chris Bauer, Saddleback Justice and Trafficking Initiative, Claude Arnold, Special Agent in Charge with ICE, Guido Hygienist with I Emphasize, Jeanette Kreitner with Grandma's House of Hope, Joyce Capel with Crittenden Services, Children and Families, been around since the 1880s, helping girls, Kimberly Yem, San Clemente Abolitionist, Lee Dundas with A21 Project, Lynn Tran of the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force, Margie Iacovoti, Zoe Children's Home, Paula Daniels, Forgotten Children, Chief Paul Kazita, Anaheim PD, Sandra Morgan, Global Center for Women and Justice, Sherry Harris from the Salvation Army, their network that works with human trafficking, Stephanie Polero and Wendy Daly, co-founders of International Sanctuary. We thank them for their help on the legislation that we have authored. And I also thank my colleagues, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, for their trip out here to California. But we must thank California State University Fullerton, my alma mater, here today as well for making this venue possible. And our acting ranking member, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Many of you know that she's the former speaker here in the Assembly in California. She's been a leader on this issue, and we are working with her on this bipartisan legislation. We appreciate her trip out here. Randy Weber, we appreciate you coming all the way from Texas. Dana Rohrabacher, Congressman, we appreciate you and all your work as well.
All the way from Costa Mesa.
All the way from Costa Mesa. And Alan Lowenthal will be here shortly all the way from Long Beach. So, but I am proud, I must say, of the work the Foreign Affairs Committee has done over the years, and all of these members serve on the committee with me, on human trafficking. In 2000, our committee put forward legislation that was focused on what we could do to force other countries around the world to put in place standards and to start to combat human trafficking. The consequence of that legislation is that we now have 130 countries around the world over that period of time that have strengthened laws on their books. And the reason they do it is a simple one. They try to stay out of the report that the State Department now does every year that shames them for their failure to comply with efforts to try to stop the trafficking of underage girls and try to stop the trafficking with respect to labor trafficking. And so we have these tier rankings that we do. And part of our efforts in Congress have been to increase the pressure, increase the standards, and as we're traveling, meeting with foreign heads of state, this does come up. This does come up. They complain about the report, but they try to comply with it. And we think that continued vigilance is what's called for on that front. We appreciate that our top point person in the world, who has the role of traveling and is headed to Algeria a little later after his appearance here in California, but he is Ambassador C. DeBaca, and many of you know he has had a rather prominent role in forcing this issue internationally, and we're we're pleased that he's with us today. Thank you, Ambassador. Trafficking is a global problem, but unfortunately for us, it's not a faraway problem. And I mentioned here in Orange County some of the statistics, some of the things that the District Attorney's Office has shared with me. We have had a doubling of trafficking in underage girls every year for the last 3 years that those working in community-based organizations offering services have noticed in the community. And it is because of the expertise established by some of these criminal syndicates in the use, for example, of Romeos to find underage girls, to find a girl maybe 14 years old, convince them to leave her state, come to California, leave her ties with her family, and then begin the process of moving in with them, and before they know it, they're being trafficked, beaten and trafficked. And as the district attorney will tell you, it is those beatings which establishes something of a Stockholm Syndrome type situation, where that child is now afraid to testify against the individual who has done it, and now he sells her into a criminal syndicate that deals in these underage girls. We especially appreciate the work of the police departments, including the Anaheim PD, that are represented here today, in their efforts across this county and in Southern California to try to prosecute. And for that reason, many of the organizations that we mentioned here today were involved in the passage of a statewide initiative in California, a statewide proposition, which went into effect this year. And as a result of that law, we have our first conviction of an individual who was trafficking underage girls from, in this case, he had taken her from Bakersfield to Sacramento, a 13-year-old, and he received, as I recall, some 32 years in prison for that act. This new legislation has teeth, but in talking to the prosecutors, what they say is they also need additional legislation, not only to attack the problem of trafficked underage girls and labor trafficking out of countries in the United States, and we have legislation to do that, but also additional legislation to try to make it easier for prosecutions to go forward by creating an environment for underage girls especially to have an element of safety and be able to come forward and testify. So we're going to discuss some of those issues. But we held a committee hearing in May on this issue and had one of the supervisors from Los Angeles County, Don Kanabe, tell about his experiences and the discovery that girls 10, 12 years old were being trafficked in Los Angeles County and some of the steps that the county took. Well, going forward, we want to build on that work. The Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force has assisted 250 victims. 93% of them are women. 80 of them were from foreign countries. A third of them are recruited in foreign countries by unscrupulous labor recruiters. Our legislation, the legislation that I've introduced, the Fraudulent Overseas Recruitment and Trafficking Elimination Act, requires that foreign workers be given accurate information about the terms of employment and anti-trafficking protections under U.S. law. It prohibits recruitment fees or hidden charges used as coercive leverage over workers. No longer can you get them into debt bondage. It requires the foreign labor recruiters to register. They've got to remain in good standing with the Department of Labor. Why do all of this? Because it gives us a ground for prosecution when people are involved in bringing trafficking into the United States. And it provides new incentives for law enforcement to ensure that recruiters and employers follow under a series of penalties, fees, and consequences. So I look forward to the input from our expert testimony here today, and as my chief of staff can tell you, based on her volunteer work with underage girls trafficked in India and in Cambodia, and there the average age when girls are trafficked is 11. She says, you don't see the harm of human trafficking most clearly in numbers or statistics. You see it in the eyes of the individual person whose life is being stolen and whose dignity is being assaulted for the profit of someone else. We'll hear today, thankfully, that in Southern California, some of our organizations are on the cutting edge to fight trafficking and rescue and protect victims. And I want to thank our witnesses, but especially in closing, I want to thank our courageous survivors who will testify for being here to share their insights, share their expertise with our committee, and your message will be heard loud and wide and certainly taken back to Washington, D.C. We'll now go to Congresswoman Karen Bass from Los Angeles.